Fellas, it's good old Halloweenie season again. There's spooks running around, there's skeletons on the walls, and there's disgusting middle-aged yuppies running around ruining everything with their business. So, you know what that means? It means it brings us to the topic of today's video, which is Yuppie Psycho by Baroque Decay, a studio based out of Spain. Yuppie Psycho is of course developed by Baroque Decay out of what I want to say is Spain, but as advertised on their website, they're basically a collection from developers from all over the planet. The last game that these folks made is the Count Lucanor, which is similar to Yuppie Psycho, as in it's a top-down exploration game with some fantastic horror elements, but while the Count Lucanor stars a young boy in the cast, our game's protagonist is a full-grown adult, and we get him in Brian Pasternak. Brian from the get-go is presented as a lower-class man from the suburbs who, through miraculous means, has been invited to work for Sintracorp in the capital region. Sintracorp, being one of the largest corporations on the planet, is tasked with basically data management. And from the onset of the first 5 minutes, we're pretty much introduced to the quarter of a cask. Firstly, we meet Kate, a QT from the capital who's also starting her first day at Sintracorp, and some asshole named Chapman that immediately shames you for your lower birth. Luckily, in the real world, these sort of class distinctions wouldn't matter too much, because we'll soon be under the control and tutelage of the Great Firewall, controlled by my great friend Xi Jinping. And you know what that means, fellas? It means that you gotta make sure that we're gonna say the right things, but we're always gonna say the right things, or else this gun that's right off camera is gonna shoot you. So, but don't worry about it too much. Don't worry about it. We're gonna be classless. We're all gonna be fine. So, but let's keep going. After the pleasantries of meeting some of your fellow workmates, you come across the true and unusual purpose of your position within Sintracorp, which is to hunt down the witch. And surely, fellas, mega corporations are pretty evil, but come on. A witch? A hunt for this Vavitch? It's kind of odd, but you know what? That ain't the only thing, and you better strap yourselves in, because this is one whack game. For now, we'll let the story of Yuppie Psycho simmer in the background for a little while, but all you need to know right now is that the game is wacky and bizarre as it is unsettling and creepy, and sometimes kinda horrifying. So with that, let's talk about how the game plays. As you can immediately tell with Yuppie Psycho, the game takes place in a top-down exploration format that so many of these indie exploration games do. You move around with the WSD keys and you use your E key for the majority of the game to interact with people or objects. Your goal is to basically follow a series of tasks and puzzles to uncover the truth of the witch that has been terrorizing Sintracorp for what seems like decades now, and in order to do so you have to go around through the various floors of the corporation and complete a series of puzzles. Right from the get-go, you actually have full control of the elevator and can go to every floor in the building except for the 6th floor that doesn't seem to exist anymore. Of course, in some of these floors, you're going to come across some obstacles that make it nearly impossible to traverse, whether it be the near pitch-black environments of marketing in the human resources department or some areas of the hive that are so rife with foul farts of these goddamn corporate shills that they soon become unbearable. And in order to traverse these areas, we'll need special tools that'll come later in the game. And the idea of finding tools and abilities to aid your traversal through the Sintracorp building and open areas that were previously barred to you is not an old concept. If anything, you can find it in old survival horror games. And luckily, fellas, that is not the only distinction I'll make today. When I say this game takes a lot of inspiration from old school survival horror, I mean old school. As in, you wanna save that damn game, well you gotta fork over some goddamn resources. In order to save in Yuppie Psycho, you have to go to the photocopier and use a specific piece of paper known as Vavitch, or witch paper, to photocopy your soul, which in turn explains how the loading in this universe works. After your eventual and untimely demise, you essentially use one of your souls you copied at a certain time and place to relive that life. Now, witch paper is scarce throughout the playthrough and will make you strategically think of when and where you want to save your game. The issue is that I never really had too much trouble finding a healthy supply of witch paper, since to be honest, the game isn't really particularly difficult. The only times I really died were during the encounters with the bosses, which, I'm gonna say as a quick aside, is a pretty funny play on words considering the corporate environment. But anyways, the only other times were when the game threw some goddamn nonsense our way. Most of these moments, and I do mean moments, fellas, it really doesn't happen that often, is due to the game's poor pathfinding when it comes to its AI. The enemies for the most part are rather easy to deal with because as long as you are underneath a table or stuff yourself into a locker, they can't really damage you. But usually, they don't really know how to leave you alone. An enemy might follow a set path when it's patrolling, but the second it catches wind of you, it'll beeline it towards you as fast as it can, not caring for any of the objects in the way. This can be something beneficial since when running away you kind of want them, to get stuck behind something so they don't get you. But what I found is that for the most part they follow you to a nearby desk that you're hiding under and just fail to find a way to go back to, well, where they're supposed to. This usually means that you gotta take a little bit of damage to get through the next area and get back on track to which you were going. Which I mean isn't the end of the world, but it's not just annoying as hell, it's a legitimate criticism on the design of the game. And if I had another minor gripe is that the game at times can feel like it's directionless, especially near the beginning when you have all the floors to your disposal, but as the game starts to go along it becomes a lot more clear and you get to know where you're going. And these gripes aren't particularly big ones, and they're really, you can only find it between the moment-to-moment gameplay in certain aspects. But let's get real, fellas, like, with adventure games like Yuppie Psycho, the moment-to-moment tactile gameplay is not your main focus. If anything, it's going to be the story, and the story in this game is pretty good. The main shtick that Yuppie Psycho has going for it with its narrative is this wonderfully bizarre juxtaposition between things that will make you laugh and things that will give you a nice spook. This is all blended together for great effect with its corporate setting, providing a dingy office space that's dilapidated and off-color that's reflective of the underlying unease with the entire Sintracorp building. There's hives where legions of faceless middle managerial businessmen wander around aimlessly like literal zombies looking to do nothing but waste time and, well, quote-unquote, make the company happy. In other parts of the building, there's whole expansive, fog-filled, spooky forests growing inside of the building. So you know that Yuppie Psycho isn't afraid to go a little into the absurd to make you feel creeped out or to give you a nice laugh. And holy hell, Sintracorp is hiding a bunch of skeletons in their closet. And a lot of them being, well, literal, because they got not just weird areas to the building, but a whole menagerie of legitimately dangerous hazards that have been placed there by the witch. Which leads us to the man that has to hunt down this foe, which is Brian Pasternak, and he's basically almost a self-insert for the player and all the stuff that he comes across. But I mean that in the sense that the basis of Brian's character is based upon the interactions he has not just with the building, but with other people that work within it. And each one of these characters has their own little weird quirk going for them. Within our very office, we got the piggish man who's basically your supervisor within the company and the slack-offish Mr. Hugo, who delights himself in doing nothing but wasting the company's time, showing essential skills in the corporate environment like photocopying your ass and making a nice pot of coffee. And sitting across from your desk, and just hold on here folks, I'm going to give a little quick aside, I don't think you use this desk in the entirety of the game for anything useful, so it's kind of like a nice little joke that you really are wasting your time here. Anyway, sitting across from your never-used desk is the grungy-looking Miss Sosa, who has few words to say to Brian apart from short, one-word sentences and cryptic dialogue about the going-ons of the company when away from the local supervisor. It's immediately obvious from the get-go that Sosa is not just hiding something but is very eccentric herself in her mannerisms, her hobby in having a weird corporate video club consisting of only 2 members, and of course in her image of a pale, permed-out desk junkie. And that's just to name a few. In reality, fellas, there's a huge laundry list of awful, wonderful, weird characters that you'll find throughout the game. My favorite one is a goblin that you find in the forest that, if you give him a little UPC whatever code to lick, he'll tell you its properties. So it kind of works like this. The goblin looks a little bit like me, so we'll use it and it's like this. UPC code. Tastes like diabetes. But of course, the most important character of all is the building itself, with a shallow yet entertaining layer of lore surrounding the whole building. Every time you reach new floors or go into new rooms you have never been to before, your mind tends to wander trying to figure out what sort of mystique is going on in this building. Things like, why the hell are there little organic mines everywhere that blow toxic gas when you get close to them? Or what's with the entire goddamn forest and cemetery on the 8th floor? And of course, you have to always ask, what the hell was that thing in HR? Needless to say, there's tons of equally wacky and unsettling stuff throughout the entire building, and while it's fun to traverse the building and see for what there is on offer, when it comes to explaining it all, Yuppie Psycho kinda falls a little bit short. See, one of my biggest gripes with the game is that the entire final sequence that brings you to the resolution of the game while starting off with a ball-to-the-wall moment doesn't really explain what needs to be explained in the end. While some of it kinda gets explained, there's a whole lot that feels like it has been glossed over or sort of forgotten. For example, there's quite a few rooms within the building that throughout the game you never go into, so it makes me wonder if there's some sort of use with them down the road in DLC, but it's never really alluded to, so the whole thing just kinda falls a little short a bit. Now let me explain. The rush ending, I feel, is not one from a sort of storytelling ability. I feel like they kind of just rushed through the ending because maybe they ran out of money. Maybe we don't know. Maybe they had problems in development, but needless to say, the ending does feel a little rushed, but there is a nice caveat. And the caveat is that we're going to get DLC here pretty soon that will not just add it to the normal game, but will add it to consoles and things like that. So you'll see it in PS4, PS5, whatever the hell. But let's leave it at that and start talking about more of the presentation of Yuppie Psycho, and starting with the simple yet charming pixelated style. The fellas over at Baroque Decay have done a good job of providing areas of the building that are equally unsettling in both a more horrific manner and a more mundane manner that hits closer to home for a lot of people. The building all over is dingy and dirty, with coffee-stained carpets and musky walls that you can tell have fell into a long period of decay. There's a constant clickety-clacking of keyboards and the occasional noises like coughing to fill the silent void for a lot of the office spaces that also have this classic horror lighting to give you that edge. Or, maybe it's mood lighting for the poor fools that have to actually work in the hive. I'm just gonna warn you to the fellas out there that have sensitive, nice, little, wonderful, beautiful eyes. There's some strobe light effects out there that, personally, that didn't really affect me, but who knows, you might be epileptic or something like that. And if you are, just watch out, fellas, because you get some strobe light effects later in the game. Eventually, these dilapidated office spaces end up transforming from something you might encounter in a typical middle-of-the-road corporation to something more akin to a Japanese horror game, with a menagerie of unsettling and grotesque imagery that seems to be spawned from the witch. A lot of these creatures or instances have to do with subverting your expectations with what you would think is a normal day office tool or concept into something, goopy. Take, for example, the Human Resources Department, which is made up of women that have a giant set of lips replacing where the human face should be, basically showing you these people aren't really people and are an extension of Sintracorp, an organ, if you will. There's also some more goofy subversions with a few of the other departments, my favorite being that the most esoteric part of the archival department is just an impossibly ancient library, where the proprietor of which is this gross Spider-Man thing. But hey, not everything is an awful, goopy monster that's out to devour you and destroy you, or, even worse, fire your ass and leave you penniless out on the streets, especially during these trying times. So with that, we're going to say that there's some more other interesting elements to the aesthetic that this game has. For everything in Yuppie Psycho that's gross and horrifying, there's other elements that either exaggerate the mundaneness or the vaporwavy elements of Sintracorp. For starters, most of the people within the building are relatively normal people that really just don't fit with the corporation. It's simple to not just separate the characters from most of the absurd or horrific elements of Sintracorp, but it also begs the question of why there's so many relatively normal people that work at such a bizarre and creepy company. Though we don't just see the mundaneness in Yuppie Psycho, it also takes us back to the early 2000s and we get some nice vaporwavy vibes. Nowhere else can this be seen more than when you log onto your computer access to the Sintranet. And once you're in, you'll be greeted with an easy-on-the-eyes yellow grid space that seemingly extends into infinity. Other obvious homages to the vaporwave aesthetic are the Greco-Roman columns and the marble busts that jut out of the grid space in all directions. Basically, the Sintranet is a little hidey hole away from the rest of the office where you can plan out what to do with Sintra and look over the notes of what you've collected to get a better feel for what's going on with the corporation. You can also do what I did, which is just sit around and listen to the music of the Sintranet, since it's just what you might need in a spooky game like this. Like really man, just check this out. But hey fellas, now that we've rolled into the cool tunes of this game, we gotta take a look at the soundtrack done by Michael Kelly, also known as Garode. If you've been paying close attention to the tracks playing in the background of this video and been wondering to yourself, damn, where have I heard this music before? It sounds kind of familiar to me. Then, to answer your question, you've probably heard it in Michael Kelly's soundtrack for Valhalla, cyberpunk bartending action. Now to go on a quick aside, there's a fascinating, if not coincidental, and really to be honest, tangential Latin connection between Yuppie Psycho and Valhalla. That being that Baroque Decay is based out of Spain, and the fellas that made Valhalla are based out of my familiar homeland of Venezuela. I won't lie in that in anything there's a connection to Valhalla, I'll show the hell out of it because it's wonderful and aspiring to see Venezuelans find genuine ways to become financially independent, and in the case of Sukiban Games, the guys who've made Valhalla, actually acquire the funds to make it to Japan where they can get on with their lives and make the best of a bad situation. Well, now that we're free of that tangentially Latin, tangent, we can actually finally get on with the rest of the game. You see, with Valhalla, Michael Kelly wanted to create some catchier tunes that take a lot of inspiration from anime soundtracks that can be found in the 80s and 90s, aka the best time to get inspiration from any anime soundtrack. But with Yuppie Psycho on the other hand, we got a lot of different stuff to unpack, and it's all really damn fantastic and interesting. If I had to get a gist of the soundtrack, there's two different qualities at hand. There's a lot of the more horror-based soundtracks that subtly work up from moments of dread to eventually ones of full panic with whatever crazy thing is being thrown your way. And then on the other end, you have tracks that play during the most normal sections of the building, if you can even call it that, where the music is a lot more calm, but there's still this itching, unsettling feeling in the tracks like something just quite isn't right. You can really tell that Michael Kelly used a lot of the classic horror soundtracks such as Halloween, Friday the 13th, and other slashers from the 80s, while mixing it up with the wonderfully dreadful atmosphere of Akira Yamaoka's Silent Hill soundtracks. Then you throw that bad boy into a blender and blend it with the elements of what I would call elevator jazz with some good old Japanese city pop and even a few cyberpunk motifs to create a really fantastic soundtrack with a lot of variety. So let's take a second here and listen to a collection of the game's soundtracks, because with our previous use of Sintranet, we got some really cool stuff in here, so let's enjoy it for a second, fellas. See fellas, you know what I'm talking about. This stuff is pretty damn cool. So if you want to listen to the soundtrack, you can get yourself a copy of the soundtrack over at Michael Kelly's Bandcamp, which also has copies of Valhalla's soundtrack as well. Though if you want to go the extra mile and get yourself a vinyl, like I might be getting, then you can grab it over at Black Screen Records. I'll have links for both the Bandcamp and the vinyl down in the description, so go check it out there. But all in all, to basically wrap it up, Yuppie Psycho is a pretty neat little horror romp through a pretty unorthodox setting that gives me some spooks, some laughs, and generally a game that really makes it feel like no other, except for maybe Baroque Decay's other game, the Count Lucanor, which I'll probably, most likely, you know what, actually, yeah, I'll definitely be taking a look at it at some other time, because damn, these guys are good. So all in all, Yuppie Psycho, it's a neat little game. It gives us some cool spooks, gives us a lot of laughs, and it's set in a setting that is pretty unorthodox that we don't see in a lot of other places, and done in a style that isn't really done, except for maybe Baroque Decay's other game, the Count Lucanor, which I'm going to have to take a look at here pretty soon. So, even though it's got a few little flaws, I really don't think they're that substantial, so I'm going to give it a nice, good old solid 8 out of 10. Keep a lookout for Baroque Decay fellas with their new projects coming out, and of course with the DLC that should be coming out soon that will also port the game over onto consoles. That is of course PS4, Xbox One X Series XX, Nintendo Switch, and PC that it's already on. And with that, we've kind of reached the end fellas. Thanks for coming and watching the entire way through, I really do appreciate it. Don't make videos as often as I can, but well, you know, times are times, so whatever. But thanks for sticking along, thanks for keeping watching, and hopefully there'll be a new video out here pretty soon. Within Spooktober? I don't know. You know me, I don't have no set schedule, but hopefully not, but if not, this is Tomthechosen1, and we'll see you in the next video.